the chapter out or the book out, but that there may well be a continued sort of relationship between research action that kind of comes out of those relationships. I think that's a really key to what I understand and what I know from my own experience about how these collaborative, and again I'm talking here about not necessarily being able to say these are participatory. I'm not claiming that this research is necessarily participatory action research, but it's about having relationships with people in movements and about having a process that actually means that you do constantly check out stuff, you do constantly get kind of held accountable, and you do think through collectively strategic considerations about how this information is pulled together, how it's finessed, how it's released, in ways that I think aren't usually considerations within academic research. I wanted to just sort of like give a kind of quick couple of examples as well around some stuff that I've been involved in to try and give a little bit of flesh to what I'm talking about. Two examples. One is the first time I came to Canada back in '97 was for the anti-APEC mobilisations in Vancouver, and it was like part of, I was involved with anti-APEC organising in Aotearoa in the Asia Pacific for a long time. And one of the things that we did in a small activist group, we had no relationship, and we had a couple of friends who were academics, but that was about it really. No kind of relationships with researchers other than telling some that wanted to research us to go away, kind of politely or impolitely. But through things like use of, the equivalent of Access to Information Act documents, we were able to get the New Zealand Government's Cabinet Strategy Committee about quote-unquote NGOs and civil society participation in the big APEC summit that we had in Auckland in '99 when Bill Clinton came down and Chrétien and all sorts of really fascinating individuals. And what was really useful about this was that we were able to, it was just a question of digging away, asking questions that we didn't even know the answers for, and getting bits and pieces through the Official Information Act, which actually showed concretely that what we knew written down in an official statement was actually the case, which was there was a divide and rule kind of, that your usual constructive NGOs, kind of disruptive elements, and that the whole purpose of this was about co-opting NGOs and harnessing them to promote APEC rather than anything else, but also projecting this sort of international image of, oh, isn't Aotearoa New Zealand a beautiful kind of democracy? And so what we were able to do was basically be able to use research that was embedded in day-to-day organising to then get out that paper. We just basically sent it out to about 200 NGOs around the country and said, look, with a covering letter, say this is what the government thinks. If you're going to get involved in this process of the civil society consultations, you need to know that essentially this is about window dressing and so on. And this was essentially what we were able to do. We were able to heavily, basically scuttle the whole government sort of plan to get unions and NGOs on side. And so that came out of the fact that as organisers, we needed to, as activists, we knew that education, research, action were not really easily sort of separated from each other, but were part and parcel of building a movement, building a critical analysis, hopefully among a broader public. Sometimes what we were able to do too was like then release, Official Information Act stuff when we were able to get it to business journalists who had completely different political ideologies from us, but for a particular reason would see that there was a contradiction between what the government was saying publicly and what they were saying in the documents. And again, this was another way of actually sort of opening up some of these sort of cracks and contradictions and getting people to think. Same thing happened here in a number of times around mobilisations where people have been able to access those kinds of documents. The other thing I think that's really been interesting that I've been involved in for about the last 10 years has been work against bilateral free trade agreements. I'm one of the people who set up a site called bilaterals.org in 2004, which was a collaborative research, education, dissemination effort among a number of activist groups and smaller NGOs, basically saying, hey, a lot of the mainstream kind of NGOs aren't really dealing with the fact that, the FTAA and the WTO are very significant, but already through bilateral free trade agreements, there are basically we're getting further, faster trade and investment liberalisation, social impacts than these other bigger forums. And yes, there are movements on the ground in lots of different countries, particularly in the south, but in the north in particular, these are off the radar screen. And so what we've done over the last sort of 6 years as a project, which has very little sort of infrastructure and funding, is to put together a website, this report that you can download from the website, Fighting FTAs, multimedia stuff in English, French and Spanish, films, collect some of it's stuff we've developed ourselves, some of it's stuff that we've got from other places, and through that process have actually built up a network, if you like, a kind of a community of people who are both activists and researchers. So the action and the research goes alongside one another. It's a way to actually break down some of the divisions where countries are being played off against each other and movements are basically in the dark about what's going on between different struggles in different countries around these bilateral FTAs. And in a way that this project is not quote unquote owned by anybody, right? So it's not like, you know, a particular NGO or organisation sort of owns it. And again, I think this is quite a different approach to this sort of pressure on novel kind of individual brilliance that we're supposed to pursue in the academy, and actually understanding that knowledge production in social movements and knowledge production in activist settings is often something that is a collective, collaborative, incremental process that takes place. And I think we can do so much more if we actually acknowledge the different kinds of spaces and places where there is already research going on in our communities, in our different places, which may not actually be connected to universities and colleges, which may well be happening sort of autonomously, which may also be happening in collaboration with folks. But I think it's a really important milieu and a really important area that we can't afford to overlook if we're serious about talking about activist research. Just to conclude, you know, I do find that a lot of the stuff that's been written about activist research in the academy, that I've come across at least, spends too much time being concerned about the credibility of the individual academic that's involved with the research or the discipline that academic is involved in, and not enough in actually sort of like recognising the debt, the intellectual debt that we in the academy that are involved with and study social movements actually owe to the movements themselves. So thanks.